By evening, 2,500 demonstrators had been arrested, over 2,000 of them children. All jails in the city and county were filled. The strategy worked. The city began to negotiate. 8 days after the children began marching, an agreement was reached with the business community. Merchants agreed to desegregate lunch counters and to hire black employees. The next night, the Ku Klux Klan met outside the city, and Grand Dragon Robert Shelton gave this warning.
No business people in Birmingham or any other city has the authority to attempt any type of negotiation when it deals in governmental affairs of a municipality. Martin Luther King, in my opinion, epitaph can be written here in Birmingham.
Several hours later, a bomb exploded outside Martin Luther King's room at the Gaston Motel. King had already left Birmingham, and no one was in the room at the time. As a large crowd gathered, the Alabama State Police moved in and began beating blacks with clubs and rifles. In response, angry blacks rebelled and set fire to several buildings. Over the next few weeks, the riots that began in Birmingham spread to other cities. Racial tensions gripped the country, and President Kennedy was moved to action.
The events in Birmingham and elsewhere have so increased the cries for equality that no city or state or legislative body can prudently choose to ignore them. The fires of frustration and discord are burning in every city, north and south. Where legal remedies are not at hand, redress is sought in the streets. Next week, I shall ask the Congress of the United States to act, to make a commitment it has not fully made in this century to the proposition that race has no place in American life or law.
Kennedy proposed a new civil rights bill, and movement leaders wanted to make sure he followed through.
Freedom Now movement, hear me.
The civil rights movement had mobilized communities. Now it set out to mobilize a nation. In the summer of 1963, leaders announced plans for a mass march on Washington. Afraid it would become violent, Attorney General Robert Kennedy tried to prevent the march, without success. August 28, 1963. Leaders and supporters of civil rights organizations joined in Washington, D.C. to make a passionate plea for jobs and freedom. More than 200,000 people arrived from across the nation for the march from the Washington Monument to the Lincoln Memorial. It was a triumphant day for A. Philip Randolph, who first proposed such a march in 1941. But as the marchers gathered at the Lincoln Memorial, there was trouble behind the scenes. The White House was upset about a speech that was to be given by John Lewis, national chairman for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
In the first part of the speech, I said something like, we cannot support the proposed bill being introduced or being presented by President Kennedy, for it was too little and too late.
And John's speech was the only speech at the March on Washington that criticized the Kennedy administration for lack of civil rights enforcement because the SNCC people were being brutalized in the South.
As the program began on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, Lewis refused to change his speech. Finally, A. Philip Randolph made a personal appeal to the young men from SNCC.
He was 75, and here we were, one-third his age, and, he was asking us to do this for him. He said, I waited all my life for this opportunity. Please don't ruin it. And we felt that for him that we had to make some concessions.
So the three of us, John Lewis, Cortland Cox, and myself, we huddled and sat together, and the rewriting took place at the Lincoln Memorial, and and it was done out of a spirit of unity. We wanted the March on Washington to go forward.
If we do not get meaningful legislation out of this Congress, the time will come when we will not confine our marching to Washington. We will march through the South, through the streets of Jackson, through the streets of Danville, through the streets of Cambridge, through the streets of Birmingham. we be patient. We want our freedom, and we want it now.
The speech that captured the nation's attention was the stirring oratory of Martin Luther King.
Let freedom ring from Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. Let freedom ring, and when it happens, when we allow freedom ring, when we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing in the words of the old Negro spiritual, free at last, free at last, thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
In the White House, President Kennedy now saw the march as positive support for his civil rights bill.
Of the National Committee for the March on Washington,
"18 days later, Birmingham, Alabama. Just before a Sunday morning service, a bomb exploded at the 16th Street Baptist Church where hundreds of children had once gathered to march against police dogs and fire hoses. 15 people were injured. 4 children were killed. The murder of these children shook the nonviolent movement to its core. As the people buried their dead, they sang, "We shall overcome." But in anger and in rage, many wondered how.
We felt like our own children had been killed, and we knew that the activity of the civil rights movement had been involved in generating the kind of energy that brought out this kind of hostility. And we decided that we would do something about it, and we said that we had 2 options. The first one was we felt confident that if we tried, we could find out who had done it, and we could make sure they got killed. And we considered that as a real option. And the second option was that we felt that if blacks in Alabama had the right to vote, that they could protect black children. And we deliberately made a choice and chose the second option.
to tell me that they're citizens of this no good country, because integration will never happen. You never, as long as you live, integrate into the white man's system.
In the early 1960s, on inner city street corners in the North, many groups competed for the hearts and minds of Black America. The Nation of Islam and its spokesperson Malcolm X expressed the impatience that many Black Americans were feeling.
The Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaches us that it is time for you and me to stand up for ourselves. It is time for you and me to see for ourselves. It is time for you and me to hear for ourselves. And it is time for you and me to fight for ourselves. We don't need anybody today speaking for us, seeing for us, or fighting for us. We'll fight our own battles with the help of our God.
Malcolm X represented a different brand of leadership. Many of us that grew up in the South had been deeply influenced by the church, by the preaching of Black ministers, but also by the message, the philosophy, the teaching of Martin Luther King Jr., the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence. We saw Malcolm as someone, in a sense, from the outside, coming from the North, to tell us that was a different way, a different approach.
Mine eyes have seen injustice.
Voices from the North began to influence the Southern movement. It had become clear just how high the stakes were. This was a struggle for life and death. To win that struggle, the movement would have to win in Mississippi.
There is no state with a record that approaches that of Mississippi in inhumanity, murder, brutality, and racial hatred.
The Mississippi struggle had been led by the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. For 10 years, NAACP Field Secretary Medgar Evers had traveled the state fighting for racial justice.
Don't shop for anything on Capitol Street. Let's let the merchants...
In 1963, Evers organized an effective boycott of stores in downtown Jackson.
I had one merchant to call me, and he said, I want you to know that I've talked to my national office today, and they want me to tell you that we don't need nigger business.
Ignoring threats from segregationists, Medgar Evers rallied hundreds of students to march on the streets of Jackson.
You knew that something was going to happen, and the logical person for it to happen to was Medgar. And I used to try to reassure him and tell him, nothing's going to happen to you. The FBI is here. Laugh. Everybody knows you. You're in the press. They wouldn't dare do anything to you.
In June 1963, Medgar Evers was killed, shot in the back by a single round from a high-powered rifle.
And if you don't like this thing, let's get ready to change it.
Civil rights groups stepped up their campaign against the most formidable resistance ever. The issue was the right to vote. In some counties, blacks outnumbered whites 4-1. In many of those counties, no blacks were allowed to vote.
I don't want the nigger, as I have known him and contacted him during my lifetime, as a class to control the making of a law that controls me, to control the government under which I live.
The movement began recruiting local residents to help the voter drive.
I was asked would I join the SNCC, which was Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and I said yes. And they said, well, what do I have to do? They said, just try to encourage people to go and try to register, go over to the courthouse. And that was my start of going around here to my neighbors and friends and asking them, you know, would they come and go to the courthouse and try to register to vote. People were being put off the plantations. People were threatened. Folks was put in jail just because we wanted people to try to register to vote.
Local black organizers had also been murdered. There were few trials, no convictions. Little national attention was paid. But activists pushed on as the state passed new voting laws to make registration more difficult.
Registering to vote at that time meant that you filled out a 22-question questionnaire. One of the questions was, interpret any of the 286 sections of the Mississippi Constitution to the satisfaction of the registrar. Now, you have to bear in mind that some of those registrars couldn't read or write, but that didn't matter. They could still determine who should be registered if that person happened to be black, because all whites who attempted to register were registered.
In June 1964, SNCC announced Freedom Summer, a statewide voter registration effort.
We hope to send into Mississippi this summer upwards of 1,000 teachers, ministers, lawyers, and students from all around the country who will engage in a program designed to open up Mississippi to the country.
Most of the students that and people we were bringing in for the summer project were from the large universities, and they were from families who were politicians, bankers, lawyers, and others. And we felt by the fact that bringing in those particular people, that the attention of their parents and relatives from the various different other parts of the country would be on these areas. And by having large numbers of whites in here, is the press, the American public would have much more concern than if there were just a bunch of blacks that were in the state.
When the civil rights workers invaded the state in the summer of 1964 to change us, presumably into their own image, they were met with a feeling of some curiosity, but mostly resentment. They fanned out across the state, made a great to-do of breaking up our customs, of flaunting social practices that had been respected by people here over the years.
Among the first wave of recruits to arrive in Mississippi was 20-year-old Andrew Goodman of New York City. He traveled with James Chaney, age 21, and Michael Schwerner, age 24, two workers from the Congress of Racial Equality. Sunday, June 21st. On Andy Goodman's first day in Mississippi, the three men drove to investigate the burning of a black Methodist church. The church had been the scene of a civil rights meeting just weeks before. Around 3 o'clock that afternoon, their blue Ford station wagon was stopped by Deputy Sheriff Cecil Price outside the town of Philadelphia. The three young men were released by Deputy Price around 10:30 that night. It was then that they disappeared. Within days, the disappearance was national news. President Lyndon Johnson ordered a massive search. 200 sailors from the Naval Air Station in Meridian moved into the Philadelphia area and were joined there by FBI agents.
Whenever an incident like this happens, and they happen fairly often, although not usually this serious, everyone reacts the same way. They become more and more determined to stay in a state and fight the evil system that people have to live under here. I'm down here because I believe that my freedom is very much entangled with the freedom of every other man, and that if another man's not free, then I'm not free. So I'm fighting for my own freedom here.
By early July, the volunteers had arrived in full force. Working with local residents, they established freedom schools, health clinics, community centers, and they registered voters across the state. Their presence made many Mississippians fearful.
And they would say yes to everything we said. We'd say, would you like to be involved in the voter registration project? Will you go down to vote? Yes, sir. And we knew we were not getting across. We knew they were just waiting for us to go away because we were a danger to them. And in many ways, we were.
During the summer, 80 civil rights workers were beaten. There were 1,000 arrests. Despite the danger, political organizing continued. By night, the schools were used for voter education. By day, children learned everything from the 3 R's to black history and literature. By late July, the three young men had been missing for 6 weeks. Many lost hope that they were still alive. While the search continued, President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The new law increased the federal government's power to ban discrimination in public places, but did little to enforce the voting rights of blacks. On August 4th, on a farm outside the town of Philadelphia, the bodies of Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner were discovered buried together in an earthen dam. The autopsy reports indicated that the men had been killed by .38 caliber bullets. A later report revealed that James Cheney, the one black victim, had also suffered severe bone and skull fractures. August 7th, 1964. Hundreds gathered in Meridian, Mississippi to mourn James Cheney. Among the mourners was Cheney's 8-year-old brother, Ben.
I feel that he's gotten his freedom, and we're still fighting for it. But what I want to talk about right now, it's the living dead that we have right among our midst, not only in the state of Mississippi, but throughout the nation. Those are the people who don't care, those who do care but don't have the guts enough to stand up for it, and those people who busy up in Washington and other places using my freedom and my life to play politics with. That includes the president on down to the governor of the state of Mississippi, you see.
I have been approached by the people of my national office of CORE and others to make sure that the speech that's given is calm. They don't want a lot of, things stirred up and everything else like that. And I'd agreed to do that. And I said, okay, fine, it's good. But then when I got up there and I looked out there and I saw little Ben Cheney, things just sort of snapped.
I feel it deep in my heart when they find the people who killed those guys in Neshoba County. You got to come back to the state of Mississippi and have a jury, all their cousins, their aunts, their uncles. And I know what they're going to say, not guilty, because no one saw them pull the trigger. And as long as he can do that, he can sit down beside me, he can watch me go up there and register the vote, and he can watch me take some type of public office in his state, and he can sit down as I rule over him just as he's ruled over me for years, you see. This is our country, too.
They say that freedom is a
The state never brought anyone to trial for the murder of the three young men. But in federal court, Deputy Cecil Price and 6 others were found guilty of civil rights violations in connection with the killings and received sentences ranging from 3 to 10 years.
Will the delegates please be seated?
By August, 60,000 voters had registered for a new political party in Mississippi, the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party.
The Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party is only beginning, and it is beginning on the basis that it believes that a political party should be open to all the people who wish to subscribe to its principles.
The MFDP planned to challenge the state's Democratic Party for the right to represent Mississippi at the Democratic National Convention in Atlantic City. It would be the culmination of Freedom Summer. Atlantic City, New Jersey, site of the 1964 Democratic Convention. Lyndon Johnson expected no opposition in getting his party's nomination, but was concerned the MFDP would disrupt party unity. With the arrival of the Freedom Democrats on August 20th, there were now 2 delegations in town from Mississippi. The Democratic Party held hearings to decide which would represent the state on the convention floor.
If the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, where we have to sleep with our telephones off of the hook because our lives be threatened daily, because we want to live as decent human beings in America?
We will return to this scene in Atlantic City, but now we switch to the White House and NBC's Robert Goralski.
Lyndon Johnson cut off coverage of MFDP testimony by making a last-minute request for network airtime. Despite the TV cutoff, Mrs. Hamer's message had gotten through. Viewers back home sent telegrams to delegates urging support of the MFDP. But President Johnson was afraid Southerners would desert the party if the MFDP were seated. The convention came up with a compromise. It would not allow the MFDP to represent Mississippi. Instead, it offered them 2 seats at large.
The whole issue around the compromise for us and for me was that it was some kind of political ploy that they understood. But for us, for Mississippi, it was what was right and what was wrong. It was, we had been done wrong. Our rights had been taken away, and you just couldn't issue some 2 seats at large to correct that.
Some political allies and national civil rights leaders urged the MFDP to accept the compromise. But the Freedom Democrats voted overwhelmingly to turn it down. In the words of Fannie Lou Hamer, "We didn't come all this way for no 2 seats when all of us is tired." The struggle for voter registration continued in Dallas County, Selma, Alabama. For 3 years, organizers for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee had worked with Selma residents in demanding the right to vote. Here, as elsewhere, they met solid resistance.